Well, greetings once again. As I mentioned in my email that I sent last night regarding our announcements, with the loss of two of our longtime members right before the feast, with Dolores Petty dying in September, and then also Malcolm Kerr from the Reno congregation, Dolores Petty from this congregation, and then the passing of our dear friend and longtime member of the church, Willie Foster, it gave me cause to think about life, more specifically, my life. These three deaths of friends have caused me to think about what kind of legacy I might leave behind. In our two small congregations, we still have three individuals who are in their 90s. A few years back, we were talking about how many people we had in our 80s. Now we've got three in our 90s. Alva White, who is the oldest between both congregations, is 97 years old. Then we have Virginia Roby at 94, and John Hull, who is 92, almost 93. In long discussions that I've had with all three of these older folks, I've gained perspective that can only come from talking to someone that's had that many years under their belt. We also have several 80-year-olds. We've got Carmela Hanna over in the Reno congregation. We've got Barbara Kennedy here, Betty Showers here, Ruth Singleton, Louise and Dudley Trone, and a few more that are bumping up against 80. So we've got a lot of older folks in both of our congregations. For some reason, for whatever reason, I have no idea why it is, all my life I've been fascinated with discussing life with people that are substantially older than me. I can remember going back to my teenage years, sitting down with people 2 and 3 and 4 times my age, and just loving to just talk. Even when I got into my young adulthood, we lived with this lady in this house to share housing expenses. She was twice my age. She and I'd stay up to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning just talking about stuff, and that just fascinated me. It always seemed to encourage me into more forms of self-evaluation as well as motivation to do more with my life when I see all that so many of these people accomplished. You talk to some of these older folks, and they just talk on and on and on about stuff they did here and stuff they did there and how they accomplished this and how they accomplished that. And it's like a grain of salt to them. It's like that's what everybody does. You do a lot of stuff in your life. Let's turn to 2 Corinthians 11 to begin with today. 2 Corinthians 11. If you think about it, there aren't too many things that happen in life that get accomplished in life that we really don't plan for. That we don't plan for in advance, and as a result of our evaluation and the assessment of what we're trying to achieve. Like many of you, I've accomplished many of the personal goals in my life that I've set for myself, but there's still quite a few that have eluded me. And I'm convinced some of them will probably elude me to the day Jesus Christ returns, because as I look at some of them, I think to myself, if God allowed me to accomplish this, I'd probably go off track. I'd probably get sidetracked or hit a bump in the road. Every once in a while, I think it's good, though, to go back and look at your life. And when I say look at your life, I mean literally sit down in a private, quiet place, put on some soft music, pour yourself a glass of wine or a martini or whatever floats your boat, and just sit down and think, what have I done with my life? Where have I been? What have I achieved? What have I accomplished? It's an enjoyable thing to do, especially if you've had many accomplishments, and most of us do. Most of us have. I would encourage you to try to do this sometime. It's really a pleasant, personal thing to go back on your life. And if you've got time and you've got the inclination, pull out a pen and a piece of paper and start just writing down as many things as you can think of, going as far back in your life as you can possibly go, of things you've done, things you've accomplished, things you've participated in. And then you can discuss these with people that are older than you later on. And I'm sure that our 90-year-olds and our 80-year-olds could write a long list, a litany of things that some of us wouldn't have the opportunity to. Paul did a lot of this self-assessment, self-evaluation, going back and looking at his life, not necessarily all the time looking at what he accomplished, but what he had been through and what he achieved. We're going to break into where Paul is condemning false teachers here in 2 Corinthians 11. False teachers, false prophets, and showing that his life was one of recognition and his life was one of accomplishment. 2 Corinthians 11, and let's begin in verse 22. Talking about these other individuals, he says, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Jesus Christ? He said, I speak as a fool. I am more in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths more often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1, as we read about in the book of Acts. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've spent in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and in thirst, in fastings often, in cold and in nakedness. Besides the other things which comes upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. Paul said, I've been through a lot. And Paul was that kind of a person. He was the type of person that did what he said he was going to do. And when he was committed to something, he did it to the best of his ability. And this continued to take place daily in his life. It was like never ending. Again, as we read through the book of Acts, once we got started on the life of Paul, it was like nonstop. Do something good, get beat up. Do something good, get beat up. Do something good, get stoned. Do something good, get flogged. Do something good, get, buried again. It's like one thing after the other after the other. Let's go to 2 Timothy 4 now. 2 Timothy 4. Granted, some of the things that we just read wouldn't necessarily be considered a goal or an achievement by Paul, but they were accomplishments because he was able to sustain these and keep putting one foot in front of the other, no matter how bad it got. And I don't think many of us would continue putting one foot in front of the other going through the stuff that Paul went through. I think any one of those items would have probably put a dead stop in our tracks. I mean, if somebody's going to stone me, I'm not going to get up and say, okay, let's do this again. I'd say, I think I need another career, is basically the way I would approach it. But not Paul. Paul looked at it a different way. Paul looked at it, this is my responsibility. I made a commitment to God. I'm going to live up to it. Some of our accomplishments that have happened to us in life and we've achieved in life have come around because of accidents, traumas, setbacks, changes, difficulties, challenges in our lives. And as I've mentioned in past sermons, I really believe God sometimes allows us. I even believe sometimes God instruments some of these things. Because he knows if we keep going down the path we're going down, we're never going to make it to where he wants us to make it. So he knocks us off track. Maybe we lose a job. Because he knows if we stay in that dead-end job or that job that's going to take us down a different path, he knows we'll go off track. So he causes us to step back, rethink, reevaluate, and take a different course of action. And sometimes, I believe, it's orchestrated by God himself. Here in 2 Timothy 4, Paul once again puts a capstone on his life about the discussions with his young protege, Timothy. And we'll see once again Paul talking about this whole concept of life and how you got to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. He had met many goals in his life that he had set for himself. Goals that sometimes were really hard to achieve, as we just read in 2 Corinthians. And he had accomplished probably the most important goal, and he was conveying that to Timothy here. Let's begin in 2 Timothy 4 and begin in verse 7. Paul tells Timothy, he said, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I've been beat to a hair's breadth of my life, and I'm still kicking. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Paul wants us to know that our lives that we live and what we do with them now have a lot to do with what's going to happen with us in the future. We are laying the groundwork by which God himself will decide how he's going to utilize us in his kingdom. The patterns that we create, the approaches that we take, the analysis that we use, the confidence that we use, the courage that we use, all of that comes into play, and it's all being developed fully by God as we live this life now. It's interesting also that God reviewed his efforts in life. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. We all know the creation account in Genesis and all that took place in this very short period of time. We're going to do just a quick summary of what we studied at our Bible study campout at the combined campout this last summer. We're going to see that God looked back on what he did and made comments about what he had accomplished. He didn't just do it and move on, do it and move on, do it and move on. It's like he would do something, then evaluate. Do something else, then evaluate it. Do something else and go back and look at it. Let's break into the story here in Genesis 1 and verse 9. This is the beginning of the third day in the Genesis account. Then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And because God said it, it was so, it happened. All he had to do is dictate it. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. God didn't just create this stuff and make this stuff happen. He stopped, turned around and looked and said, "Look at this. We did good here. This is really good." Interesting side note that this was not the first thing that God had done in the creation process, but it's the first thing that he called good. Now verse 12, Genesis 1:12. "And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind." And when God got done with that, he looked back and he said, "This is good." He saw those peaches that he had made, and he said, "These are good." He saw those berries that he made. He said, "These are good." These are good. He knew who they were good for. They were going to be good for mankind, and he knew that. This is all now the end of the third day. It then discusses the making of the sun and the moon and the stars in the heavens. Drop down to verse 17. Genesis 1:17. "God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from darkness." And once God did this with the sun, the moon, and the stars, God looked at it and said, "This is good." Everything's taking shape the way it needs to take shape for mankind is ultimately what he's after. Now, this is the end of the fourth day. Drop down to verse 21. "So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind." And once he made these creatures, he looked back again, he says, "This is good." This was the end of the fifth day. Verse 25. "And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind." So all these creatures are on the earth now, and God looked back and said, "This is good. This is all taking shape exactly like we wanted it to take shape." Verse 31, "Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day." It's also interesting that when God looks back on all that he had accomplished here, he didn't say, "This is good." He said, "This is very good. This is perfect," as we can find elsewhere in the Bible. God, the creator of the universe, the sustainer of life, the eternal God Almighty, creates this stuff, and what does he do? Just move on? No, he looks back and said, "This is good." He's evaluating his performance. He's evaluating what he achieved and what he accomplished. This is an encouraging lesson to be learned by us. Do something positive with our lives, whatever it is. Look back, assess it, evaluate it, review it, so that we can use it to encourage ourselves as well as encouraging other people. How much power is there in going up to somebody and saying, "I know you're struggling with this and you're having a really tough time with this. I went through the exact same thing. Let me tell you what I did. and you explained to them how you took these course of action change in your life and the positive effect that it had on your life and the life of others around you. How encouraging, how helpful can that be to show somebody, help somebody get through something that you've gone through yourself? You already know. And this is what achieving and accomplishing in life is really all about. It's not just about us. Yes, it can be encouraging to us, and it should be encouraging to us. But it can also be a form of encouragement to other people that we come in contact with. Let's turn to John 17. John chapter 17. Jesus Christ himself also assessed his actions during his ministry here on earth. We're going to take a look here in John 17 of part of what is really the true Lord's Prayer in the Bible. This is a passage of Scripture along with others that we go through virtually every Passover night. Christ himself here in John 17 iterates a review of what he had done here on this earth following the instructions and directions by God the Father. Let's begin in John 17 and verse 1. John 17, 1. Jesus spoke these words, lifted up his eyes to heaven, and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son also may glorify you. Drop down to verse 4. I have glorified you on the earth. I have finished the work which you have given me to do. In other words, I have accomplished what I was expected to do with the instructions that you gave me to serve you. And really, that's what our life is all about as well. Verse 5, and now, O Father, glorify me together with yourself, with the glory which I had with you before the world was. I have manifested your name to the men whom you've given me out of this world. They were yours, you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they have known that all things which you have given me are from you. This is his assessment about what he had done here on this earth, serving his Father as he was instructed to do. He took the marching orders of God and he lived them to the T. The exact same thing that we can do. We have the same kinds of marching orders. God's given us a litany of things to do and accomplish and achieve in our lives. He's told us how to live. He's told us how not to live. And we can follow those directions and follow those instructions just like Jesus Christ did, or we can choose not to, which is the easier way out. A review of his life and the accomplishments that he achieved accomplished something for him as well. I did what I was asked to do. And he felt good about it, even though he knew what was coming. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 9 again. 1 Corinthians this time. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. I find it interesting that virtually anybody in the Bible who has really achieved much in their life serving God, at some point in time has gone back and looked at it and reviewed it and evaluated it. We know from our Book of Acts Bible study that Paul had done quite a bit during his ministry after his conversion. But if you stop and think about it, Paul actually did a lot against Christ and Christians before his conversion. Why was that? Because it was the character of the man. Paul, once he was committed to something, did it to the best of his ability. He believed going after Christians was the right thing to do before God. That's the reason he did it, the only reason he did it. And he did it with gusto. He did it with achievement. He did it with accomplishment. He was good at what he was doing. Once Jesus Christ called him and converted him, he took that same approach to life and put him on a path serving him with Christianity. Paul was an achiever before and after his conversion. And that's what God and Jesus Christ were after. Here in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul also took a look at his life as he appraised his efforts and used them to teach other people. He was continuously analyzing where he had been and what he had accomplished. taking assessment of his life. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? How am I doing? Let's begin here in 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 19. 1 Corinthians 9:19. He said, "For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more." That is so contrary to human nature. Yet Paul, once converted, understood this. He said, I don't have to serve all these other men. I'm free. I've got the freedom to go live my life any way I want to. I've sinned, I've repented, and I've been forgiven. I can move on. But he said, you know what? I'm going to make myself a servant to every single human being I meet. That is an attitude and approach of mine of humility that allows you to connect with people that you might not normally connect with. Paul understood that. He said, to the Jews, I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law. Not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. Just like Jesus Christ, he mixed and mingled with people who needed help. He said to the weak in verse 22, I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. That is a mouthful. We read this passage of Scripture and say, yeah, he just adapted here and he adapted there and he adapted here. No, we're talking about massive changes of behavior. Changes of behavior that required unbelievable humility. To change his approach, knowing that one way is not going to work for everybody. He's got to approach the Jews one way. He's got to approach those with law one way. He's got to approach those without law another way. He's got to approach people who are weak one way. He's got to approach people who've got a lot another way. You can't approach the same people the same way. He said, I learned that. How did he learn that? By what we read in 2 Corinthians 9. All the crap he went through. All the trauma that he went through. God kept adjusting his life and pushing him in the direction God wanted him to go. Could God have stopped him from being stoned? Sure he could have. He could have turned those stones into rotten tomatoes. But he chose not to for the direction of Paul's life. Paul understood that. Paul learned that. He said, verse 23, now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be a partaker of it with you. It's a part of the whole process. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. Don't just trot down the track. Run like it means something to you. Go for it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. We're on a totally different plane than the rest of humanity. But Paul wondered, and we all wonder, hopefully, do we really understand this difference here, this analogy that he's making? We've got something so greater than the gold medal in the Olympics, which is like the highest achievement in athletic events in the world. That professional athletes will abandon their profession for a while to go compete in the Olympics to get that gold. A piece of metal that dangled around their neck. Paul's saying, you've got something so much greater than this that you're striving for. Look at how they discipline themselves to achieve and accomplish this. It's almost insane how they train. What Paul is saying, we've got to become insane like that toward training to become a Christian. Giving it our all. He said in verse 26, therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. He's pointing out you can't preach one thing and do another. a main message for anybody who stands up in this pulpit, ever has or ever will. Paul is showing us that what we do with our lives means everything. How we live physically, how we live mentally, how we live spiritually. Let's go back to the book of James. James chapter 4. James chapter 4. As Christians, every moment of our life is important. Why? Because it's all you have. As we work toward our ultimate goal of God's kingdom, what you've got in your life is all you've got. All those 90-year-olds, once they reach 90 years old, all they've got left is a few years. They don't have 90 more years to go. What they've done with those 90 years is done. It's over. It's ended. It's past. It's history. What we have ahead of us is what's important. Whether it's one day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, 20 years. And Paul's trying to get us to see that, and we're going to see James to see. But we have our day-to-day living that we deal with all year long, don't we? And sometimes that can be an unbelievable challenge. As you all know, I've been encouraging everybody to do the Bible reading program for the year. Try to read through the entire Bible in a physical year. Many of us started back in January. When I got sick in August, I was sick for over 5 or 6 weeks. I lost all that time because I didn't do any Bible reading and studying during those 6 or 7 weeks. Then we went to the feast and we were gone for another month almost. And I got like 2.5 to 3 months behind in my Bible reading. And I sat down at my desk one morning and I thought, you've got to be kidding me. I've got to go back 3 months and start. I thought, you know what? I'll just pick it up in January and start all over again. I thought, no, I really can't do that. I'm asking you to do it, and I'm not going to do it. So I said, you know what? I can do this. So I sat down and I started calculating things, and I thought, I've got to read 2 to 3 days worth every day now to get caught up. So a couple weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks, I can't remember what it was, I started reading again. I had to go back again, 2.5 months worth, 3 months. And I started reading, and I read sometimes 3 days, sometimes 4 days. One day, I think I even did 5 days of reading in a day. It was a little tedious at first, but all of a sudden, it started happening. I started feeling like this is better than going 1 day at a time because I'm getting this intensity of the quantity of God's truth coming out off the pages at me. And I started seeing things I'd never seen before. I've read these scriptures hundreds, thousands of times. And all of a sudden, stuff started jumping off the page that I never saw before. And it started to change the way I looked at reading the Bible. I think I can accomplish it by the end of the year. Whether or not I'll tell you whether I did or not, I don't know yet. But I'm trying. But I'm telling you, it takes a conscious effort. I can't get up. Do I want to read like that every single morning? No. Some mornings I get up and I got so many other things on my mind, that's the last thing I think about doing. But I force myself, just read 1 day. Just do at least 1 day. The minute I got done doing 1 day, okay, I can do 2 days. I know I can do 2 days. And I'll sit there and say, well, I think I can probably get the 3rd day in. And that happens every morning. You know what? If we have things we want to change, something we want to do in our lives, we have to make a conscious effort. We've got to put forth effort. It's not going to happen just by osmosis. At times, we think we can change things in our lives, where in reality, it's God and Jesus Christ who are in control of our lives. We may have a 5-year plan, we may have a 10-year plan. But if that 5-year plan or 10-year plan doesn't coincide with God's will in our life, that plan's not going to happen. And you're going to become very, very frustrated. Which is what happens sometimes in our lives. Let's begin here in James 4, verse 13. James 4, verse 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. We can make this happen. In other words, we'll go about living our lives the way we choose, and again, thinking we are in charge. It's not true. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. When you go to the doctor's office, when you go to the mailbox, when you get the phone call. and life changes. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then it's gone. He's talking in the context of God looking at a 97-year-old life, not you and me. He's saying, you know what, 97 years to me is nothing. I mean, I've been around forever. What's 97 years to forever? It's a flash in the pan. But what God's trying to point out to us is that flash in the pan is all you've got. It's what you've been allotted, whatever that is. So most of us, especially when we were younger, felt like life would go on forever. I know I did. We think there's so much time to do anything I want. I can just go figure out what I want to go do and just go do it. Look at me. I'm healthy. I'm strong. I'm whatever. But you know, it goes by a lot faster than we think, doesn't it? Just ask some of our 80s and 90-year-olds how fast those 80 or 90 years have gone by. Every year of my life, I keep saying to myself, I can't believe how fast this is going by. Verse 15, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this and do that. Compared to the plan of God, we're only here for a short time to accomplish what we may while we are here on this earth. As James is pointing out that it's God's will that we are capable to do anything. God's will and God's blessings in our life. It seems most of us look at setting goals and making plans for the future when our life isn't going so well for us. Maybe we aren't growing mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, the way we'd like to. Well, brethren, some of this happens because of our approach to life. And I've been basically harping on this, I know that, and I'm not going to apologize for it. This can be summarized by the age-old concept in the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing or things over and over again and expecting a different result. It doesn't work. It flat does not, will not, cannot change a thing. Yet this is exactly what many people do with their lives. They just think, well, I'm going to change this. They do nothing different. And I'm going to change this. And they do nothing different. And guess what? Nothing changes. As a matter of fact, sometimes it gets worse. Many of us want progress and accomplishment in our lives, yet somehow we believe that we can do this without making any real changes. Some of us have been in the church 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it might be. I've done a lot of changing already. I've done a lot of accomplishment. I don't need to change anything else. What else do I need to change? I'm good. To make something different happen, or for a different result to take place, we have to change what we are doing or how we are doing what we are doing in the things of our lives. It'll change no other way. There's many books on the subject of doing this. There's also the Bible. Let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Ecclesiastes chapter 9. Brethren, I'm sure we'd all agree that every year seems to go by faster than the last, as I mentioned earlier. One good thing to do once in a while is to ask ourselves a question. Where do I want to be a year from now, 6 months from now, a month from now? What would I like to change? What would I like to improve? What would I like to modify in my life? You know, the year 2018 will be here before we know it. And as I say that term, 2018, it's just like, it's almost surreal to me. I can remember the Y2K thing. Remember that? That was year 2000. That was 18 years ago. And everybody got all whacked and hyped up about Y2K. We're 18 years beyond that. That's a scary thought. Especially when you look at it in the context of your life. Where were you 18 years ago? Where are you today? And is there any difference? We can accomplish things if we choose to. We have our new service areas in place for the congregation now. Maybe we can apply this message to them as well. How can we do something differently than we've ever done before and maybe achieve and accomplish more for our own congregation as a collective group? As we get ready to read Ecclesiastes 9, let me give you a few aspects of our lives to consider where you might want to make a change or two. Our career. And you can take that in the context of where you are in your life. Is there something we'd rather be doing? What would it take to move to something better or something more rewarding for us in our life? And how do we go about doing that? What about our families? Have we grown in our relationship with each and every member of our family? Sometimes we forget about that. Is there something we could do to help one particular member of our family? There's a tremendous responsibility for each and every one of us in the family unit to make things work better for everybody else in the unit. That is a Christian responsibility. What about personal growth? Is there a part of our personality or our life that we'd like to change or get better control of? There's ways to do all of this. I mean, there's classes, there's books, there's seminars, there's all kinds of stuff. There's the Bible. What about our physical condition? You know, we just did the Health and Fitness Challenge last year. I have no idea how many of you participated in it. I've had a few people say, why did we stop it? Why didn't we just keep it going? You know, maybe you want to start up with that or something similar in your life now. Brethren, we can all do something to improve our health and our fitness. Your health and your fitness are about the only two things that you've got left in this life. You get some wretched disease and die, it's over. Your days are over. Or you can live and maybe live not the greatest physical condition, but you might be able to improve that. There's ways to improve every single physical condition we find ourselves in. I don't care what it is. Is it hard? Sometimes it's brutally hard. But it can be done if we really want to make a change, if we want to improve it. And the last thing I'll point out for today is our spiritual condition. You know, each week we get something that can help us in this regard if we look for it. In many closing and opening prayers, I've heard things like, help us to think on these lessons and incorporate them into our lives. I wonder how many of us ever do that. I mean, ever. How many of us leave that doorway and never make another comment about what we heard that day? Never have another thought about what we heard that day. I'm sure there is something that all of us can grab a hold of and accomplish and change in our lives if we want to. As we see here in Ecclesiastes 9, God wants us to live our life with zest and with enjoyment, whatever we're doing. Let's begin in Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 7. Solomon writes here, he says, go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. In other words, whatever we have accomplished in life, appreciate it, enjoy it, look back on it, and give yourself a pat on the back. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually encouraging. It encourages us to do even more. God says, I'm thrilled with this, man. Grab that piece of cake, drink that martini, drink that glass of scotch or glass of wine or cup of tea or whatever's your favorite, and enjoy it. Cheer to yourself. You're accomplishing stuff. God is pleased when we accomplish things in our lives and actually blesses us for that. Verse 8, let your garments always be white or pure, and let your head lack no oil. Live joyfully with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun, all your days of vanity. For that is your portion in life and in labor which you perform under the sun. In other words, what God has given you, enjoy it. And then lastly, verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do. If it's kill Christians or salvage Christians. Paul went both directions. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you're going to end up. You could wake up tomorrow morning, or you could not wake up tomorrow morning. Some older folks, sometimes when I greet them and say hello to them and say, how you doing? They'll say, I'm still breathing. And for some of us, that's an achievement. We never know, do we? We might think we do. Christ wanted all of us to make the effort, and he said he would help us. Let's go to John chapter 10. John chapter 10. There may be many things that we have the opportunity to change in our lives as well as accomplish, if we want to. We want to put forth the effort. Here in John 10 is where Jesus Christ was discussing how he was the good shepherd. We heard a story about that in a sermon that I gave several months ago. But he makes a statement here that is quite encouraging if we let it be, if we believe it. And that's really the bottom line of anything we do in this life when it comes to Christianity, God, the truth, religion, whatever it is. If we read this Bible from cover to cover and we don't believe it, it's a worthless effort. If we hear the sermons and we hear messages and we hear encouragement, we hear things and we see promises that God and Jesus Christ make and we don't believe it, there's no value in it. So when I read this, if we believe it, it can change our lives. Literally. See what I mean here in John 10, and we're going to begin in verse 9. John 10, verse 9. Jesus Christ speaking here, he said, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. Using an analogy here. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that you may have life and that you may have it more abundantly. I love how the New Living Translation conveys this passage of Scripture. Allow me to read it again. You can listen on. New Living Translation, John 10, verses 9 and 10. Yes, I'm the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pastures. The thief's purpose is to steal and to kill and to destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Jesus Christ said, I want to give you a rich and satisfying life. I'm going to step out on a big limb here. I'll bet there's not one human being in this room that can say that. I have a rich and satisfying life. I may be wrong, and I'm okay with that. Most of us aren't there. Yet Jesus Christ said, that's what I want you to have. If Jesus Christ said, that's what I want you to have, don't you think he's going to help us accomplish that? If we believed that and lived our lives accordingly, it's hard to imagine how much we could accomplish. As we read earlier in Ecclesiastes 9, it's about finding something we want to do and then doing it with our whole being. All we have to do is choose what we want to accomplish. Ask God for his will to be the guiding light in our life and go after it. As we get ready to close, let's go to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. Our efforts in living this physical life we now have has much to do with what God is going to do with us in the future. We've heard many times about this because it's true. God has planned in what he's going to accomplish now and in the future, and we are part of that plan. So he has something in mind for you. What it is, I have no idea. Probably most of us don't have any idea what exactly it is that God has in mind for each and every one of us. Try to set aside some time, because God is a planner and he really wants us to be planners. Set aside some time and think about what you'd like to accomplish down the road. Start with what I said a little bit earlier. Sit down and ask yourself, what have I done with my life so far? I don't care if you're 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. It doesn't matter. Write it down. See how many things you can put on that list of things you've accomplished or achieved in your life. Maybe you can go all the way back to when you're 4 years old and you saved a girl from getting hit in the head by a guy in the neighborhood. Something silly. It doesn't matter what it is. Put it down on paper. See if you can fill that sheet with things you've accomplished and achieved in your life. Then on another piece of paper, say, what do I want to do? What do I want to do from here on? If you leave it blank, that's exactly what you will get. Nothing will happen. Because we'll continue doing the same things we've been doing day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, expecting something different to take place. It won't happen. It's always fun to do these things, and once you force yourself to get into the groove of doing this once in a while, you'll find how rewarding and how actually encouraging it can be. Listen to Paul's words here in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, referring to Hebrews 11, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of God, right hand of the throne of God. Brethren, we have a Savior on our side. He's there to guide us. He's there to encourage us. He wants us to achieve as much as we possibly can. What we can't do, he will supply. But it's going to take effort. It's not going to happen without effort. Take something small, just something to get yourself going in a different path that you've been on the previous days, weeks, months, and years. Take something tiny and just say, I'm going to do this different. And force yourself to do it. And do it for 10, 12, 15 days. Then take something else. Jesus Christ wants us to accomplish and achieve. As we get ready to close here, let's live our lives so that when we do look back and review and assess our lives in the future, we can do it with a smile on our face because of all that we've accomplished and achieved with a little bit more effort than we put forth today. Have a great Sabbath.